You're watching DD India Global. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Our top stories. Foreign and Defence Ministers of India and the US hold annual 2+2 ministerial dialogue in New Delhi. Leaders hail enduring commitment of India-US partnership.
Dialogue has actually helped both India and the US to energize the multifaceted India-US cooperation and reaffirmed our partnership.
World leaders gather in France for the two-day Paris Peace Forum, an annual assembly to deliberate on contemporary global issues. US says Israel agrees to a 4-hour daily pause in fighting in Gaza, plan for 150 daily aid trucks for civilians. Joe Biden and Xi Jinping to meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit in San Francisco, curbing tensions between world's two superpowers, a key priority. India-US bilateral ties have seen a growing convergence of strategic interests and enhanced defence, security and intelligence cooperation, says India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh at the 5th edition of India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue on Friday.
This defence relationship has evolved into a strategic partnership, characterized by mutual trust, shared values and a growing recognition of common interests in maintaining regional and global security. We increasingly find ourselves in agreement on strategic issues, including countering China's aggression, promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific, and addressing regional security challenges.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said India and the United States have taken tremendous strides in defense partnership over the past year and are building compatibility across all domains.
Our militaries are conducting increasingly complex exercises and building greater interoperability across all domains. So I look forward to discussing all these topics with you today. And as we take stock of our accomplishments, I'm glad that we will also discuss new ways to further strengthen the major defense partnership.
India's Foreign Ministry detailed the outcome of the 5th India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue in the national capital, New Delhi.
Discussed of multiple partnerships, the trade and investment partnership, the technology partnership, partnerships relating to the emerging area of critical and emerging technologies, value chain and supply chain securitization of different products and services, partnership in the field of space, our continuing engagement in the field of mineral securities through the Mineral Security Partnership Framework, our common efforts in combating terrorism. These all and much more formed part of the overview of bilateral relationship that was undertaken by the principals earlier in the 2+2 dialogue.
India's Foreign Secretary said the meetings were indicative of the long withstanding commitment of India-US bilateral ties.
Dialogue has actually helped both India and the US to energize the multifaceted India-US cooperation and reaffirmed our partnership, the objectives and the goals inherent in it. We are grateful to the principals for guiding our efforts to elevate the India-US relations.
The Israeli army released footage showing Hamas targeting western Jabalia. Israeli troops said they also struck a shipping container with 20 rocket launchers. The footage was released 2 days after the Israeli military said its troops had secured a Hamas stronghold in Jabalia. Meanwhile, 2 people were injured in a rocket attack on Israel's Tel Aviv on Friday afternoon. Hamas claims the rockets were fired on Tel Aviv as response to mounting civilian casualties in Gaza. Paramedics said 2 women in Tel Aviv suffered shrapnel wounds after the rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Israel's military said some 9,500 missiles, rockets and drones were fired from Gaza and other fronts since October 7th. 2,000 of them had been shot down by the air defenses. World leaders gathered in France for Paris Peace Forum, an annual assembly to deliberate on contemporary global issues. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. Gets us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Shabendu. World leaders are meeting at the Palais Brongniart for the opening ceremony of the 2-day Paris Peace Forum. French President Emmanuel Macron, European Council President Charles Michel and former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, among others, are present at the forum. Delegates from over 50 nations are attending the annual assembly to discuss contemporary global issues. DD India's Alex Carrier joins us live from Paris. Alex, lots for the leaders to discuss. What's the latest from today's meetings?
Well, Nick, it's a very ambitious agenda that the leaders and thought leaders and heads of state will be tackling today, chief among which is climate change, the effect of climate change on the polar ice caps, trying to find standards or set standards for how nations and organizations behave on the poles of our planet, but even more ambitious than that, there's also looking at how we behave in space. All of that will be discussed, and in case that wasn't enough, they'll also be talking about AI, the potential benefits, the potential serious risks, and trying to hash out with industry leaders how governments should best respond to the threat and benefits of AI. Add to that the Christchurch call. That is why Jacinda Ardern, who you just mentioned, is in Paris. The Christchurch call is working against and trying to eliminate terrorist content online, so that will also be on the agenda. But certainly climate change is the big issue today. We have a very strong representation from developing nations, particularly African nations. Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, Nana Akufo-Addo, the president of Ghana, are both here. They will be able to interact with their Western partners, their heavy polluting partners that disproportionately affect the developing world. So a lot on the agenda, and certainly a very busy day for the leaders in Paris, Nick.
Well, plenty there to discuss, but despite that busy agenda, have events in the Middle East over the last month overshadowed what's taking place here at the conference?
Yeah, and I think that's quite fair to say that the Middle East has been the key story, has been the big story getting the news headlines. We saw yesterday President Macron effectively tacking on a pre-conference conference about peace in Gaza. Now, that had 2 objectives: ramping up the kind of diplomatic pressure we have seen applied by European leaders increasingly, calling for humanitarian pauses. President Macron saying those pauses need to build up to a ceasefire. That's the first time he used that term. Officials from the Élysée Palace telling me that actually that reflects the severity and the growing severity of the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza, but also offering practical solutions. We heard from the president of Cyprus, who offered a maritime corridor of aid to Gaza. We know that those land borders are incredibly tricky to get through, and that corridor of aid would be ships coming in, and the Cypriot president saying that there is a landing zone available in southwestern Gaza that would allow the aid to come in and allow help to get to those who most need it. So certainly a lot on the agenda for those leaders to deal with: climate change, AI, as we said, extremist content online, but certainly the situation in the Middle East, very much the focus of the leaders as well.
Thank you, Alex. That was Alex Carrier reporting live for us from Paris. Portugal's President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa has called for a snap election on the 10th of March. The announcement comes after Socialist Prime Minister Antonio Costa offered his resignation following the arrest of his Chief of Staff as part of an anti-corruption investigation. President Rebelo said that the government will function for now, but the election is needed to provide clarity and direction for the Portuguese people.
I have been called to decide on the scenario created by the government, the consequence of the Prime Minister's resignation. I have decided for the dissolution of Parliament and called elections to March 10th, 2024.
In Spain, the agreement between the Socialist Party and Catalonia's Junts to support acting Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's bid for another term is being contested by many in the country. Nevertheless, it's given a ray of hope to the Socialists to regain power. DD India's Trent Murray gets us more.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has sealed another term in office, but he has paid a very big political price. The centre-left incumbent has spent the past 15 weeks in torturous negotiations with a number of smaller parties to try and gain a majority, and it appears he has been able to do that, but with the backing of one controversial group. They are the Catalan separatists, a party whose very existence in Parliament is all based on trying to gain independence for their region of Catalonia. The price that Pedro Sanchez has paid for their support is a new law that will give a blanket amnesty to 7 political leaders that were involved in a failed independence referendum back in the year 2017. They held that referendum to try and break away from Spain, but the country's government and court said it was illegal, and the plotters of the referendum were subsequently arrested. They will now be freed, it would appear, as part of this deal for Pedro Sanchez to get another term in office. And while this will be good news for him, many analysts are questioning just how good it is for Spain's political stability, having a party in government that wants to essentially break up the country and have a part of it separated. We know the opposition has been very critical of this move. They, in fact, won more votes than Pedro Sanchez's party, but they just were not able to get to that crucial 50% mark in order to try and form a coalition. We know that this matters as well, not just to Spaniards, but to Europe as a whole. Spain is the European Union's 4th largest population, 4th largest economy. Frankly speaking, what happens there matters to the other 26 members of the EU. And of course, there is just opposition to this within the country. We do expect major protests to take place this coming Sunday, with the main one at the headquarters of Pedro Sanchez's left-wing party. Trent Murray for DD India, Berlin.
Washington says President Joe Biden will meet his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, on Wednesday in San Francisco. The meeting has long been anticipated, but only just confirmed. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
This has been a long time coming. I mean, there'd been an expected meeting, or people have been talking about an expected meeting for weeks, but no one had actually pinned down a particular date until now. I think if you look at it from the Chinese side, what they want is, they've said in the past, when there were the idea of a meeting with, between Mr. Xi and Mr. Biden was mooted, that the Americans would have to be sincere. And they've said that a lot during the meetings or during the trips of senior American politicians since June, started with Antony Blinken, the American Foreign Minister and Secretary of State, visiting Beijing. They've been saying that whenever Americans come, that they want America to be sincere. And I think this means, basically, that Beijing wants America probably to make some concessions to look good for President Xi. Obviously, China probably has to make some concessions itself in order that President Biden can go back to the White House and say, look, this summit has been worth it. And remember, it's the first time the two men have met for more than a year, and in that year, an awful lot of bad things happened to China's relationship with the United States and vice versa. Remember the spy balloon, the supposed spy balloon that flew through American airspace back in February, that America actually then shot down, which China always said was a scientific balloon. And then there's been more and more, there have been more and more incidents in the South China Sea. where some of America's allies, like the Philippines especially, have been prevented or certainly made life more difficult for them to supply bits or atolls in the South China Sea that the Philippines says belongs to them, and the Chinese say belong to them.
As Asian leaders prepare to arrive in the US city of San Francisco for next week's APEC summit, one of the questions is whether there will be new announcements on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Launched last year, IPEF included non-APEC members India and Fiji. It's seen as an attempt to counter Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. DD India's Iris Spitzer reports from San Francisco.
Negotiators are reportedly working furiously behind the scenes to try and be able to show some meaningful progress when leaders from Asia and the Americas gather next week in San Francisco for the APEC summit. The Biden administration launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, known as IPEF, last year, and it's widely seen as an attempt to counter Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. IPEF has 4 so-called pillars: trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure and clean energy, and tax and anti-corruption measures. It has 14 founding members, including India, although India doesn't participate in the trade portion. Well, the agreement on supply chain resilience was completed in May. The other pieces have been more difficult. According to reports, agreeing on labor and environmental standards has been tricky, and earlier this week, the U.S. suspended talks on some digital trade regulations out of concern that those would limit the country's ability to enact still tougher technology regulations here. Despite India not being an APEC member, Indian officials will be in San Francisco for the IPEF meeting, taking place concurrently with the APEC event. Iris Spitzer reporting in San Francisco for DD India.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met his defense minister Sergei Shoigu and top generals to discuss the war against Ukraine at the Southern Military Grouping's headquarters in Rostov. A Kremlin statement said that Putin heard reports on the progress of what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine. The statement also said Putin was shown new models of military equipment. The European Union has said that the bloc will work on providing aid to Ukraine despite the Hungarian veto. The bloc plans to give Ukraine $53.4 billion in aid, and it's proposed expanding budget support to help Ukraine pay salaries and meet other expenses. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has already objected to the support, and he's been promoting his ties with Moscow. However, EU officials said the bloc will ask other EU governments to set up their own aid package with Kiev. EU's 27 member states are due to vote on the package at a summit due next month. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Shibendu, back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much, Nick, for those updates. And still to come on DD India Global. US arm of Industrial and Commercial Bank of China hit by a cyber attack. India celebrates Dhanteras, marks the beginning of Diwali festivities. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. India celebrates the festival of Dhanteras on Friday, officially marks the beginning of Diwali festivities, the festival of lights.
India's biggest festival, Diwali, kicks off from Friday. Dhanteras, also known as Doordarshan, originates from two words, Dhan, which means wealth, and Teras, which means 13th. This festival is celebrated on the 13th lunar day of Krishna Paksh of the Hindu calendar. Hinduism is the largest religion in India. Dhanteras marks the beginning of the 5-day-long Diwali festivities. According to Hindu mythology, those who offer prayers to Lord Dhanvantri are relieved from diseases and sufferings. It is also believed purchasing new cutlery and items made of gold or silver on this day also bring good fortune and fight against bad luck and negative energy.
गिफ्ट पर्पस के लिए भी है और जो अपने लिए ले रही हूँ वो इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए है, फ्यूचर के लिए। धनतेरस पर हमारे इसे शुभ माना जाता है कि गोल्ड लेना तो मस्ट है, तो मैं एवरी धनतेरस आती हूँ और ज्वेलरी बाय करती हूँ।
गोल्ड एक डुअल पर्पस चीज़ है, आज आप इस्तेमाल भी करते हैं और इन्वेस्टमेंट भी है।
According to Indian scriptures, Dhanvantri is considered the god of Ayurveda, an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. This divine figure imparts the profound wisdom of Ayurveda for the well-being of humanity. Munmun Bhattacharya's report for DD India.
Let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. US arm of Industrial and Commercial Bank of China has been hit by a cyber attack. A notice on the company's website confirms that it had experienced a ransomware attack that resulted in disruption to certain systems starting on Wednesday. The attack caused immediate disruption, with members forced to reroute trades. Argentina aims for success in choosing between libertarian Javier Milei and Peronist economy chief Sergio Massa for the 19th November presidential runoff after two election shocks. In a London High Court ruling, Prince Harry, singer Elton John and 5 other high-profile British figures can have their lawsuit against the publisher of Daily Mail paper. The 5 claimants have accused the publishing house of serious privacy breaches dating back 30 years. Cuban watchmaker Ernesto Barrios established his private venture 2 years ago, crafting wristwatches and clocks from recycled materials after a ban on private companies was lifted. Despite funding challenges and economic crisis, his made-in-Cuba watches are gaining visibility in Havana hotels and select stores, addressing the void left since ties with the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. In a bid to address the critical issue of stubble burning, flying squads have been deployed across 22 districts in Punjab and 11 districts in Haryana. The decision, made during an emergency meeting led by Cabinet Secretary, involves officials from Central Pollution Control Board forming flying squads. Recent data from CAQM and state governments indicate that stubble burning contributes to a staggering 38% of air pollution. On November 8th, while harvesting in Haryana is over 90% complete, Punjab lags behind at about 60%. Bongo Sagar, the 4th bilateral exercise and 5th coordinated patrol between India and Bangladesh navies, unfolded from November 7th to 9th. Ships and aircraft from both the sides patrolled the Bay of Bengal, showcasing joint communication drills, gun shoots, tactical maneuvers, concluding with a majestic steam past. INS Kotar and INS Kiltan, representing the Indian Navy, demonstrated their prowess in this maritime ballet. The ongoing decision and the tradition of exercises enhance mutual understanding between the two naval forces. UK High Commission in India's national capital, New Delhi, extended their warm wishes for the Festival of Lights and conveyed their warmth to the nation on Diwali.
Namaste. आप सबको ब्रिटिश हाई कमीशन की तरफ से Diwali की शुभकामनाएं. Diwali is a truly global event, celebrated in India, celebrated across the world, including in Downing Street and across the United Kingdom. That's why I would like to say, आपको आपके परिवार की दिवाली सुरक्षित, समृद्ध और खुशहाल रहें.
And that's all for this edition of DD India Global. Let us know your thoughts on news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global. Namaskar.